Adonai roi lo echsar b'hinoteh sheyarbitzeni al menuchot inaleini nafshi yoshevev yancheni b'ma'ale tzedek v'cheni b'magle tzedek leman shemo.
Those beautiful words were from Psalm 23, and let us join together in English. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guides me in straight paths for the sake of his name. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. When I think of Alfred Hiller, I'm reminded of the passage in Torah when God instructed Moses to inscribe a second set of tablets to replace the first one that he had smashed. And tucked into that reading includes a rundown of all the pilgrimage festivals. And there's a memorable line in that section which says, Lo yera'u fanai rekam. None shall appear before me empty. Of course, this verse has a particular meaning in its context, that it was essential to make the journey to the temple in Jerusalem at the holy seasons of the Jewish year and stand before God's presence bearing one's choicest gifts and sacrifices. However, after the temple was destroyed and fulfilling this commandment became obsolete, our rabbinic sages chose to understand that line metaphorically as a collective injunction in every age. They taught that throughout our lives, each of us stands before God. From the moment we're born until the moment we die, we are given the precious gift of time. Time we're not to squander away or to fill up with selfish or destructive pursuits. Time not to appear before God empty. Instead, we are to fill up our lives, to show up each day with love for our family, with offerings to share with our community, and with the example of the fullness with which we're living. So today, as we gather here at Congregation Beth HaTefillah to celebrate the life of Alfred Hiller, we think and remember how long his life was. In fact, he would have turned 90 this Thursday. And those of us who knew him and loved him could never feel that that was even long enough. But more important than the length of his life, we're here today to celebrate that his life was full in all of the ways that the rabbis spoke of. He didn't show up empty-handed. Wherever he was fully there, and he was giving, and he was kind, and he was giving and loving to his children, to his grandchildren, to his great-grandchildren. He was giving of his time and treasure to worthy causes, bettering his community. He was giving friendship to so many of us who were lucky to be counted in his circle. In death, I think we can say that he stands before God full with the many offerings of his life. As Joyce said, family was so important to Al, and so we extend our deepest sympathy to all of you, his beloved Joyce, his children, Amy and Phil, Reed and Sandra, grandchildren, Julian, Sydney, Riley, Alyssa, Allie, and Haley, and great-grandchildren, Coda and Finley. We also remember his daughter, Joni, of blessed memory, who Al was so devoted to and who loved him dearly for all of her 50-plus years. All of us here today, both in the sanctuary and via live stream, feel as fortunate as all of you, his family, to have known and loved Al. And we look forward to hearing your memories, your special memories of him in a few moments. Besides his love for his family, part of what made Al's life full was his faith. Al came from a solidly Sephardic Jewish family, and his Jewish life began early, accompanying his grandmother to Saturday morning Shabbat services every week at a traditional synagogue. His parents made their congregational home at the Reformed Temple Sinai in New Orleans, and he was confirmed there. And Al always considered it his primary temple home. Ellen Heller Cohen, currently the president of Temple Sinai, and also a Sunday school student of Alfred's from when he taught Sunday school there, said of him, "Al and my father, Theo Heller, were friends, and my dad often commented that there was not a kinder, more caring, or more decent man than Alfred Hiller." Other dear friends from Temple Sinai, Diane and Rick Guevara, remembered how Al was such a great friend and role model to them and their two girls. When they moved to New Orleans and joined Temple Sinai, there was Alfred, always at the door, always smiling or with a joke or some important piece of information. And they recalled how no one could play Jewish geography better than Alfred because he knew everybody and was related to many of them. And he was always willing to share his deep knowledge with them and tell the history of all things New Orleans. In a tribute that they sent, they wrote, "Yes, Alfred taught Sunday school, but the real lessons he taught were in the way he lived his life. He taught us by his actions, feeding the hungry, visiting the sick, and welcoming the stranger. He lived his life the way we all strive to. If you ever needed a definition of the word mensch, the easy and obvious answer is Alfred Hiller." Mark Murov and his wife Rita were another special couple to Joyce and Al from Temple Sinai. And Mark wrote this to Joyce about Al. "He was in every way a gentle man. His abundant kindness to others was the definition of him as a human, and he was rewarded for it by meeting and marrying you, Joyce. No one could have better cared for him than you always, always did. I was so pleased that his obituary mentioned his long-form letters, which I found so charming. Those letters were my first thought when I learned that he passed, and his cursive script was perfectly fitted to the generosity of his words and sentiment. After Hurricane Katrina, Al and Joyce made the difficult decision to leave New Orleans and move to Waco, Texas. But that didn't stop Al from becoming an integral part of Temple life there. In fact, not long after arriving, Alfred was elected Temple president of Waco's Reformed Temple Road of Shalom, and people there still remember Al with a lot of fondness. So Al's life was made full by his faith and by his family, and he was also so lucky to have worked and retired from the same company, Freeport Sulphur Company, in the research and development lab there for his entire career as a chemical engineer until he retired at age 55. And this meant that he had a wonderful collection of coworkers who became family to him as well. Their tributes of Al have poured in over the weeks. Tip Fowler remembers Al as always upbeat and informative. Dr. Rust, they called him, who was always a fountain of information about metal corrosion in saltwater environments, metal corrosion in H2S environments. Does anybody know what that is? H2S, even Joyce doesn't know. Paint systems to prevent corrosion, but as Tip said, the only kind of corrosion Al didn't know anything about was the corrosion of character or values. He was a very class professional and a friend to so many, and he will be missed. Art Nakin, thank you, echoed that same sentiment, saying Al was a true professional, but much beyond that, he was a class human being. I learned so much from him, and as he continued to assist in the engineering department long after he retired. He would never send an invoice for his services or expertise. I had to make one, which he objected to, but I didn't listen to him. And Al loved his Jewish faith. He was a volunteer in almost every area, from hospitals to Meals on Wheels. So much more could be written, but suffice it to say he was a very special person to know and to learn from, and his was a life well lived. Alan Peacock, who was a contemporary and friend of Reed's, but who went to work at Freeport Research and Development as an adult, remembers Al becoming a good friend to him, as well as an advisor, bridge adversary, and so much more during their time at the lab. Raul Fanti, another, did I say that right? Another coworker, still remembers Alfred's great sense of humor and dry wit. And in that vein, Robin Strickland shared this story about having lunch once in, Joyce knows what's coming next, about having lunch once in the dining room with Al, as well as other colleagues, JJ and Dan Jones from the lab. And JJ asked Rabbi Hiller, as they like to call him, because he was the Jewish expert in the lab, about what makes a pickle kosher. And then JJ went on to explain that he had had lunch a few weeks earlier at a New York deli with a friend and asked for a sandwich with a kosher pickle. And when the waiter brought out the dish, the friend politely asked if it was indeed a kosher pickle. And when the waiter stopped and said no, as he took the sandwich back to the kitchen. And when he returned and put the platter out, JJ could detect no difference between the pickle that returned to the kitchen and the fresh one on the plate. His friend thanked the waiter and ate the pickle. And so JJ asked Al, what made that pickle kosher? And with that twinkle in his eye, Al turned to JJ and said, you just take a sharp knife and cut off the tip. Dan and Robin fell on the floor laughing, but JJ didn't get it. And Robin said that was Al. Al endeared himself to many in this community of Congregation Beth Hatafila. He liked to call me boss. He'd come to services with Joyce and say, "Shabbat shalom, boss." I think he's the only person who ever called me boss. And talk about showing up with generosity. For much of these last month of his life, Al didn't speak much, but when he did, it was usually to say thank you. Thank you to the health aides, to Joyce. When I visited last, there weren't words, but there were smiles, really generous and appreciative and connective smiles. Joyce, you did take care, extraordinary care of Alfred these years. You have been a champion of all things Jewish and supported him in making a Jewish home. In these years of illness and decline, you adapted with grace to his changing needs, honoring his wishes to the best of your ability every step of the way. And I have no doubt that he thrived for as long as he did because of your loving attention and care. And I also know how grateful you feel that Reed and Sandra are now showering you with equal love and attention as you grieve and forge on with life without your beloved Alfred. I hope it is of some comfort to all of you that Al stands before God full. Your lives and all of our lives are fuller because he touched us. In the Jerusalem Talmud, the rabbis commented also on the verse, "And none shall appear before me empty," and postulated that it meant that one's life should be a gift not only while one is alive, but also after one's death. And Alfred truly embodied this Jewish ideals. The values he has bequeathed to his family, the service that he gave to his community, his presence here in our congregation, the friendship that he offered so willingly to so many of us are gifts that will continue to enrich our lives and bring us all blessings, even though he is now gone. Zecher Tzadik Libracha, may the memory of the righteous be a blessing. Amen. At this time, we'll hear tributes from Sandra, and then Reed, and then Amy, all children.
My name is, just take a minute. My name is Sandra Bilbray, and I'm Alfred Hiller's daughter-in-law. This is his granddaughter, Riley, and Sydney is sitting right there. I was fortunate enough to be part of his last chapter of his life, his last 11 years. Excuse me, I'd always say, "Hi, Big Al," and he'd respond with, hey, little Sandra." I gotta say, I admire anyone who calls me little. Sydney and Riley, both 8 years old now, recently wrote a wish list to Santa for Christmas, and they put "Grandpa comes back" on their list. They cried. They cried big tears when the quiet yet strong force of Big Al left this world. My father-in-law was there in the NICU at Mission, where they lived for 4 weeks when they were born, and they were just 4 pounds each. I remember him reaching out his hand and his strong hand and their tiny hand in his. Advanced to today, almost 9 years later. Over the years, he chased them, he danced with them, he told them silly jokes, he lunged at them suddenly to make them shriek with laughter and run around the house and make our dogs bark. He and Joyce moved here to Asheville to be closer to them. With that twinkle in his eye that the rabbi spoke of, he'd often say, can you believe they used to be 4 pounds? I love watching them grow. Big Al is remarkable, really. I never had the privilege of knowing him prior to him developing dementia, but I share this only because his character, his strength, and his integrity still shine brilliantly. I still got to know the man who he is. Dementia can take a toll on the mind, but for Big Al, it never took away who he is as a person. We've had tons of meals together. As our dinners would wrap up, he'd say, I've had an elegant sufficiency, and we'd all chime in with his second line, anything else would be a redundancy. He loved the playfulness of words and wrote beautiful long-form letters. I watched how Big Al and Joyce are to one another. I admired how they openly talked about and honored the memories of their previous spouses. Their relationship was on a higher plane than any I've ever witnessed. Big Al thanked Joyce profusely for her loving and attentive care in the past year. He told her multiple times daily that he loves her, and he thanked her. She saw to it that his last days were filled with delicious bowls of ice cream and his favorite yogurt. She saw to it that he always had a warm blanket and a comfortable place to be and a quiet home. One time, Joyce told me they had, in the last few months, that they had middle of the night conversation over peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I don't think I've ever heard a more romantic sentiment than that. If you know Big Al, you know he loves his New Orleans roots and Tulane University. He's a gentleman and a generous soul. He loves family, classical music, manners, football, golf, creamed herring in a jar, and my homemade cherry cheesecake. Of course, not those last 2 things together. He was a fighter. He beat leukemia long ago and fought hard against spindle cell carcinoma. Together, Joyce and Big Al made the decision that he'd die at home. He never complained. He would just quietly say, that's life. Even when he was weak and it was hard for him to walk steady, he'd walk us to the door after our visits because that's just the proper thing to do. One time, when the girls were just toddlers, they were screaming and chasing after each other naked in our house, something we affectionately used to call naked baby alert. In his firm voice, matching his handshake, he'd say, put some clothes on. We'd all hide our giggles. We respect him and his proper ways, his old-fashioned charm. He's a humble force of nature and quiet strength. He has persevered through some really hard losses, like the loss of his first wife and one of his daughters. He diligently cared for them both to the end. His daughter Amy, my sister-in-law, has his kindness, generosity, and charitable nature. I admire both his resilience and his kindness. I often hear stories from my husband Reed on the incredible character and devotion to service of both of his fathers. Big Al spent his retirement giving back to others. We can all learn so much from him. Big Al has so many people who love him, and he gave all of us a beautiful gift when he knew the end was near. He said, "I've had a wonderful life, wonderful family, wonderful friends, and wonderful experiences." He told us all as we were gathered around him, how could you ask for anything more? Just days before he passed, I tiptoed into his bedroom where he was. He was in and out of sleep. As his eyes took focus, in a raspy voice, he said, "Hi, little Sandra." We got to exchange "I love yous." Then our daughters came into the room. I watched as he squeezed their small hands, and he woke with a brightness to tell Sydney and Riley he loves them. He even tried sitting up. Then he put his hands back in prayer pose and went back to sleep. Big Al left an indelible mark. He left us all with a legacy of how to live a life of honor. Thank you. Riley, did you want to say something? Do you want to say you love him? Right here? No? Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi Cantor, Brotherhood, the Sisterhood, the congregation, friends, and caregivers who are here with us today, and comforting Mom and our family as we also celebrate Dad's life today. The title of my eulogy is called "The Influence of My Fathers." I'm Reed Bilbray, and Alfred Eugene Hiller was and is my second father. I purposely refer to him in the present tense today because when you make a difference and impact people you love, you live on in the people you leave behind. My second dad, Alfred Hiller, left such a legacy. My mom, Joyce, and my first dad, Fred, were married for 32 years. My mom and Alfred were married 33 years. My first dad, Fred, died when I was 24. He raised me to become a man, self-reliant, serve others. He taught me how to fish, camp, and fix things. My dad, Alfred, was my father for 33 years. He showed me how to become part of the community, how to give back and help others, and how to enjoy the many little moments of life. Through his example, he taught me how to love again. Which leads me to a story about Mom and Dad's first date. It was a blind date, actually, arranged by mutual friends Nelson and Frances Chisholm, who they thought both of them should meet. The Chisholms were friends of Mom and my first dad, and they were all active members of their church. Nelson was a coworker and close friend of Alfred. Looking back at this moment was a reminder to me how all our life connections and crossroads are known long before we arrive to them. As there is a God, a universe, a spirit, which can unfold a beautiful life for us if we listen. My advice to Mom on our first date was not to act like she's at a Chamber of Commerce event. Well, Dad fell asleep at the end of the first date. Mom was perplexed and a bit sad because she was so struck that night about all things Alfred. She soon learned that their date was at the tail end of a weekend Alfred spent caring for his oldest daughter, Joan. Joan often spent weekends at home with Dad, away from her group home where she lived. Alfred slept very little over the past 2 days. I took note of Dad's resilience, his steadfast commitment, and his devotion. When he offered my mom an apology for falling asleep, I knew he was a gentleman. When Alfred asked me for permission to marry my mom, I said yes quickly and added, "Now she's your responsibility." And we've had a lot of jokes over that over the years. Alfred had one condition, though, after I said yes. He said, "I want to make sure that our two families are one." Dad had no interest in remarrying unless the entire families were on board. Life is meant to be fulfilling, he said, full of love and commitment with family bonded. So he asked me if he could adopt me formally, as Mom would adopt Amy and Joan, and I would adopt him as my father. He never asked me to replace my dad. In fact, Alfred and Mom lovingly honored, lifted up, and talked about their previous spouses. He emphasized to me that if he was going to be there to be my dad for the next part of my life, and boy, was he. While adult children can at times be remote, not call or see you much, and sometimes not agree with you on particular policies, Dad was always there when I had questions, needed advice, or just needed someone to be there. There were countless times when he would literally stop what he was doing or plans he had made to help with a sick grandchild or a family member. Family was always first for him. He demonstrated that in his actions. With their marriage, I gained two sisters, Amy and Joan. I gained a brother-in-law, Phil, and a nephew, Julian. I was no longer a singleton, an only child. My new small family filled a hole of not being alone any longer. Like most families, we created memories together. Like early on, the time Dad gave Amy and I a budget to purchase a camera for her as a Hanukkah gift. Apparently, we blew Dad's budget of what he had in mind by a few $100s. And as I stood there explaining to him with great pride that it was a great package bundle, he faked having a heart attack. That was one of our first of many brother-sister bonding moments that we were fortunate enough to create as adults with Dad. The retelling of this story brought many years of laughter to all. Like me, my dad was a scout. He shared his Jewish faith with me and my family, warmly bringing us into all of his cherished celebrations and sharing his beliefs. He was also accepting of others with different beliefs. Dad loved all of his grandkids and great-grandchildren. With my first three children, Alyssa, Allie, and Haley, I recall our trips to New Orleans each year, and the zoo, and horseback riding, the museum, City Park, and the many wonderful meals at their favorite restaurants throughout the city. He devoted his retirement to one of service. He delivered Meals on Wheels, called bingo at nursing homes, and helped anyone in need. Several times he'd empty his pantry to feed others and hand money to strangers on the street or outside a grocery store. Alfred Hiller loved playing Santa Claus at Colonial Oaks Nursing Home and Ochsner Children's Hospital, sometimes accompanied by his grandchildren Alyssa, Allie, and Haley, who served as elves passing out cookies. With his humor and wit, he'd say, "Every child needs a Jewish Santa Claus." Alfred was always a man of service. As each grandchild entered the world, he came to greet them immediately and visited for many birthday parties. Mom and Dad traveled a lot during their years together. Frankly, they took trips that we'd learn about after they returned. They lived an active life, serving, attending many social events, going to church and synagogue. It was their own life that they designed in New Orleans until Katrina hit. They then moved to Waco, Texas, to be near family and to be close to the excellent medical care Dad was needing to monitor his leukemia in remission, his recurring bouts with skin cancer, and as we began to observe his developing dementia. I went through a life change over 13 years ago. The hardest decision I've made in my life was calling Mom and Dad and telling them that I had made the decision to get divorced. Dad listened and simply said, "I love you, you'll get through this, and I'll always be there for you, and we will always be there for our grandchildren." Dad warmly welcomed my wife, Sandra, with open arms, and she quickly melded into the family. After our twin daughters, Sydney and Riley, were born, my parents moved to Asheville. We actually planned their move with intention, knowing that this would be their last stop, something I'd recommend to all families. The entire family discussed Mom and Dad's end-of-life wishes, and we all agreed to honor them. My greatest joy has been the last 8 years with Dad. He and Mom were there when Sydney and Riley were born and in the NICU. They never left. My first 3 kids didn't have that experience of having grandparents just down the street as they grew up. I didn't get to see the joy for my parents as grandparents to have their grandkids just down the street. I've been blessed to spend more days and meals with my parents these last 8 years in Asheville than I did as a young adult. Dad's final gift was in how he chose to pass, at home on his terms. My first dad was in the hospital with complications from type 1 diabetes, had a heart attack, and died. I'd never had an opportunity to see him one final time as death was unexpected and I was living in another city. With my father, Alfred, his last blessing was to be at home when he took his last breath. A half hour before he passed, Sandra took our girls home to put them to bed. I was there with my mom and my second father when he took his last breath. There was only peace at that moment. Dad passed, but he did not leave. He simply transitioned out of his body and into our souls. That's how his legacy will live on. He will always be with us, guiding our actions. I love you, Dad, and I'm so grateful that you now meet the other best dad in the world. Thank you. One of my daughters, Allie, one of Alfred's second granddaughter, recorded a small piece of a memory from her as a child that is a cute song that we'd like just to share with you in honor of Dad and the way he was always instilling things in his grandchildren to live on.
My favorite and really only, I guess, memory of Big Al is that he would sing to us 3 kids, I guess his grandkids, me and my sisters. He would sing the blackbird song. Whoa, said the blackbird sitting in a tree. I had a mate as well as thee. She flew away and never came back. Ever since then, my head's been black. That's my big memory of him. And he would change the color and change the lyrics and sing it over and over again. And I can still feel his way of speaking, his voice. And that's Big Al.
Dad made a consistent effort with our family to always keep his faith and spirituality and God centered and focused. And Dad always led our prayers before dinner. And we captured one of those, and I'd like to end my presentation today just having you listen to Dad leading us in prayer before a meal. Go ahead.
Okay, now you can say it.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzilekum min ha'oretz. Praise be thou, Lord our God, King of the universe. Bring us forth food from the earth. Thank you for allowing us to enjoy this meal with our family. Amen.
Amen. Touchdown!
Okay, thank you. Oh.
All right, it was our own little addition to the end. Thank you.
I learned about surface tension from Dad. At breakfast every morning, he made his coffee by heating a small pot of milk. Into the cup went the instant coffee. Then at the counter, he would carefully pour the milk into the cup, stir it, and then very slowly carry the full to the brim cup and saucer to the table 3 feet away. It was fascinating. He never spilled a drop, and I could see the surface of the coffee kind of move around as if one unit that never broke. Later learned that was surface tension. Then he would carefully spread his 2 pieces of toast with peanut butter. I'd get the comics with my Frosted Flakes, and he'd get the sports. And that's how we began our weekdays. So much to say about my dad, how to narrow it down. I like to start with some images, then talk about what my dad taught me, then talk about what he brought to me. Images include Dad writing his long, newsy letters or paying bills at his desk in the den, cutting the grass on Sunday mornings, his rusty red bike, yes, rusty. He was a corrosion engineer. Pretty sure it was red. Driving the 1970 Chevy Biscayne around town at least 10 miles below the speed limit. "Honey, put it in gear," my mom would say. Also making the long trip to Dallas or Waco for family gatherings, his arm resting on the open window. Going to numerous dance recitals for me, then later piano recitals, soccer games, and other events for his grandchildren. Trick-or-treating with Julian. One year they both dressed as Superman. As others have mentioned, calling bingo at the nursing home and dressing as Santa to visit patients and deliver cookies at the hospital where my mother had been. Joyce was Mrs. Claus. Also, the grandkids joined him at the nursing home wearing their Santa hats. Attending Friday evening services at Temple Sinai and seeing him visit with everyone at the Oneg. The annual crawfish boil and picnic with his coworkers from the lab where he worked. Taking walks with my sister Joan to get an icy at Time Saver or a meal at Wendy's. He always picked up any coins he found and earned the nickname Eagle Eye. Joan learned to spot coins too and would say, "Daddy, money." He later kept the coins he found in a tin and recorded the amount found and the date on a little notebook. And honestly, you guys, I found this nickel in the parking lot on my way in today, and I just thought, thanks, Dad, you're here. Tulane was very important to him. I remember growing up, we'd park uptown and then walk blocks to the Tulane games with my mom and I and Dad would walk there. And then he'd watch away games on TV, often getting quite agitated. And Mom and I just kind of let him have his space. We enjoyed going to 3 musicals every summer at the Tulane Summer Lyric Theater. He took a picture with me after my college graduation with his pockets turned inside out. And this relates to Tulane because I got to return the favor at his 50th anniversary of graduating from Tulane. Of course, I had my pockets turned inside out. He had a strong connection there as his parents both met there. He met my mother there. And then my cousins continued the tradition of attending Tulane, as my cousin Beth went there and really got reconnected with Dad as he took her to restaurants and kind of showed her his wonderful New Orleans, and she grew to love it just as much as he did. My cousin Kirby went there, and also now Bailey is a senior there. Some more images of my dad came from trips we took as a family, me, Mom, and Dad, and later just the 2 of us. The 3 of us went to Pensacola, and I remember body surfing with Dad in the crystal clear waters of the Gulf. We could see small schools of fish. Mom was able to travel at that time, but she couldn't come to the beach. And as I think about those times, I realize how difficult it must have been for both of them. Mom had to stay behind, and Dad had to leave her in the room. But neither one of them let on. It is only now as a spouse and as a parent that I understand the sacrifices they made so that I could enjoy the vacation. The most special a memory I have is the trip the 3 of us took to Disney World. Because Dad worked for Freeport Sulphur Company, we were allowed passage on a sulfur tanker, the Louisiana Brimstone. We sailed out of Port Sulphur through the Gulf of Mexico to a port in Florida, then drove to Orlando. It was amazing. I saw the whole Milky Way for the first time. 2 other memorable trips were the ones Dad and I took alone, first to New York City when I was 12, then to Chicago right after I graduated from college in St. Louis. In New York, we took the train in from Scarsdale every day. Dad had his first iced coffee, and we both enjoyed giant-sized hamburgers. In Chicago, we went to a Cubs game, and Dad scrambled to get me a ball hit during batting practice. I remember some guy said, nice scramble, mister. Joyce marvels that we didn't get lost, because us Hillers have a famously bad sense of direction. Dad always came to parent weekends at Wash U. He joined the Parents' Council and loved visiting with the other parents. Again, other trips without my mom that must have been so difficult, but he never let on. I'm so grateful that Dad got a chance to travel with Joyce. They took bus trips all over the country and made it to England, France, and Israel, which was a very special trip for them. They had a wide circle of friends that gathered and enjoyed each other's company. You have to be from New Orleans to appreciate this. One group was called the Mary Mother Truckers, and they also had wonderful times with their folks, the folks from their synagogue in Waco. And Dad had a group of friends that they called the Romeos, retired old men eating out. One of the pictures is up there. So now what Dad has taught me. He taught me how to record stock dividends in a ledger. He was meticulous. He taught me how to pick crabs, his favorite seafood. He taught me how to be kind and generous, and he taught me that it's important to have religion in your life and how special Judaism is. From Dad, I learned that dressing up is a blast, especially if you can show off in public. Remember, we're from New Orleans. I also learned how much fun it is to embarrass your kid. Dad had a great sense of humor and loved to tell jokes and roast people. He was never mean-spirited. It was always a gentle ribbing that was usually returned in kind by coworkers, family, and friends. I also learned from Dad that it's important to value a child's feelings. Finally, I learned that no matter how hard things get, taking care of your family and friends is what's most important. What did Dad bring to my life? First, he brought my first mom's family, the Brands, Lewises, Dubinskys, Josephs, all my aunts, uncles, and cousins with whom we spent wonderful holidays and celebrations, many trips to Waco, Dallas, and Houston. Through his love of genealogy, he brought me closer to the Levies, his mother's side of the family, a lovely group of people as well. Finally, he brought Joyce, my second mom, into my life, with my brother and sister-in-law and all of my nieces and nephews. 29 years with Joy, 33 years with Joyce. He was a wonderful father, father-in-law, grandfather, husband, great-grandfather, and I miss him. And I'm grateful that all of you are here today, both in person and from afar, to remember him, honor him, and to celebrate his life.
El male rachamim, shochen במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפיך שכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזהר הרקיע, מזהירים את נשמת אברהם בן אביו שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים אז תראהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, to the soul of Alfred Hiller, who has gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember all his worthy and righteous deeds. May his soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. The Lord is his portion, and may he rest in peace, as we say together, Amen. We remain standing now and join in the mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'lizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam alamei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudasha b'richu le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru Amen.
As was listed in Alfred's beautiful obituary, people who are wishing to make contributions in Alfred's memory are invited to do so to a charity of your own choice, and the family will remain in the lobby area after these services are concluded to receive you if you've not been able to share your condolences. And this is the conclusion of our service. Thank you all for being here to support and comfort Alfred's family at this time.